Welcome to Over the Falls podcast, episode number 25. This week, we sat down with Russell Hughes-Pickering, who is a corporate lead officer for Economy and Regeneration in Ceredigion County Council. We sat down and chatted about his career, his ability to handle stress, his voluntary work, his diagnosis and treatment for prostate cancer, and a good old chat about Aberystwyth and everything in between. We hope you enjoy. Right then, Russell Hughes-Pickering, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Welcome.
We'd like to start with your career, if we can, and your journey to where you are today. So, how did that start?
I brought up in Aberystwyth, went to Borth Primary School for about a year, went off to Llandudno College, did geography, biology and art at A-level, decided I couldn't do a geography degree, decided on planning, and went off to the University of Westminster, or the Polytechnic of Central London in those days, so in the centre of London. I just thought that had to be the place to be.
Yeah.
And did my planning degree, and then joined London Borough of Hounslow as a graduate planner, basically a career grade planner. You sort of do a bit of the planning application side, the planning policy. Was meant to do a bit of enforcement, but people left, and I started to sort of move up the ladder, mostly on sort of retail and employment type thing. So I dealt with an application for an IKEA, Costa, Costco, Tesco's, those sorts of things.
Gotcha.
And along came the Assembly, tail end of 2000, and that just created a few jobs because people left the local authorities to go and work in Cardiff, and openings came back up in Aberystwyth, so that was the time to move back, basically. So that was the sort of journey from here to Llandudno to London and back to Aber.
What's Llandudno like?
Llandudno?
Yeah.
Great.
Good time.
I think it's one of those sort of places, if you were, in my day, if you were good at sport and you could get on with people, you got on in school. It was one of those things, one particularly academic, in that sense. You were there for a sort of all-rounded education. I sort of continued going back because I run the old boys cricket for 25 years, and so I kept going back. We only had two fixtures, one against the school and one against Brecon, Christ College Brecon, who were the sort of rival schools. So kept in touch, and I'm just about to become one of their governors from this September. So
fantastic,
lovely. So you were cricket then, sport-wise? Well,
you only had two sports, cricket, rugby and cricket.
Yeah, I was going to say
there was things like athletics, but that was for people who couldn't play cricket or and cross-country who couldn't play rugby.
Yeah, fair enough.
What was it like going from Aber to Westminster? Was that a bit of an eye-opener at a relatively young age, I suppose, if you went to uni?
It was sort of different, and I sort of picture an image of Jimmy Somerville sitting on a train going from probably Glasgow to London on his own. And it was a little bit like those in those days. It wasn't a sort of trip that you did with your father who took you there. You sort of just jumped on the train here and ended up with a bag or a couple of bags and ended up in the middle of London. But the first year I was in Halls, and the Halls were opposite Madame Tussauds. And the advantage of living in that sort of location is you can walk everywhere. And probably one of the things I've learned from that is wherever I've lived and worked, I tend to live and walk within a sort of 15, 20-minute distance. Slightly different here because Aberystwyth would be my base.
Right.
Albeit the Aberystwyth offices are closer, but I've always enjoyed sort of just walking around the place and seeing everything.
Yeah,
and
of course.
As a place to be, just fantastic. Yeah. And so much going on. And I guess the issue was mostly that you didn't have the money to enjoy it as much as you'd want to.
Sure. Was London relatively expensive even, well, I guess it's all relative, isn't it, really? But I can imagine Aberystwyth Uni's a bit less expensive nightlife-wise and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't have seen it at the time because you're sort of a student, you don't have a great deal of money, you'd go to the Students' Union sort of Wednesdays for sports days and union nights. But I also had a couple of part-time jobs. So I worked in Boots, and the Boots underneath Piccadilly Circus, the ones under the lights, so right in the centre of London. And from there, I sort of worked and then did something else afterwards.
Gotcha.
So that was really good. And then I had another little part-time job in Harrods spitting
Did you?
kids' shoes.
Cool.
No way.
Yeah,
Wow.
kids' shoes, posh kids' shoes, but
Posh kids, yeah.
something different, something to learn from, and something where I think you learn to deal with different people.
I just want to say
And I
that,
think
yeah.
it's one of those skills that you need to have. And I think in my sort of job, having got back here, you end up going from a planner to a planning and building control, and then planner, building control, housing. You've got to learn sort of new skills in the sense of the work area. But what probably you need all the time is that sort of agility and ability to sort of be able to talk to anyone, understand the issues, try and look for the solutions. And so I sort of hopefully come across as a people's person and not some stuffy old corporate lead officer at the top of some service in the council.
Sure.
How long were you in London for?
Got there in 1985, so student from 85 to 88. Left in 2000, beginning of 2000.
Oh, that's a good stint then.
Yeah, 15 years. And probably I could have stayed, and I've often thought about retiring there, which is a bit odd.
Yeah, people don't tend to do it that way around, do they?
I probably couldn't afford to, but the idea in my head was that it's a nice place to live, as long as you live in a fairly nice area of London. But there's plenty going on. So
because I've been to London as a visitor. I love it, but I don't think I could ever live there. It's just too fast paced, isn't it? It's just the rat race, the tube. But you've obviously completely different.
Yeah, and again, I think it'll come down to where you lived and whether what you want to do is mostly within walking distance. And yes, you might have to put up with going on public transport to get into the centre, but there's nicer ways to do that than the tube. So the tube is manic, whereas overground trains from say 30 minutes out, not necessarily that bad as long as you're travelling after sort of 10 o'clock in the morning. So if you're retired, I can see that being good. And one thing you had in places like London, you have massive parks, and so in terms of green space, sort of chill space, it's there. Whereas actually, if you think about Aber, not many parks. You've got a great beach, you know, and you've got a coastline and all that, but it's not quite the same in terms of parkscape.
You haven't got botanical sort of gardens or anything that some
No.
places have and things like that. But then I guess if you go a little bit further out, but you're going beyond walking distance now, you have lovely places like Nantarari and etc. But then you have to drive there, don't you?
Yeah.
So
I mean, I think there's an appeal to both locations. You know, you just got to decide where you want to be and what's the right time to do it. And I think, you know, although I'm talked about potentially retiring back to London, I don't think it's going to happen. And actually being there as a student and staying for the first, say, 10 years of your career was probably a good time to be there.
I'd say so.
You know, it gives you a chance to bounce around authorities, look at different jobs, look at different aspects, and also I think the complexity of the planning or your profession is likely to be more complex there than it is here.
Yeah.
Odds on, I'd say yes.
100%.
Yeah.
Just giving you a hell of a base to come back to somewhere like here, where it's not going to be as complex, is it?
And it's. I think probably what it does is gives you a little bit more time to think about what you want to do with the service, as opposed to deal with the specific applications or policies. So you sort of have a little bit more time to think about those sorts of things. So yeah.
So you talked about the planning aspect of your life and the roles you've had. Can you just simplify that for me personally? Because what does it entail? What do you do? Sort of thing. Give a little example of something that I don't know you've achieved locally.
Yeah, in terms of planning, I mean, if I just try and explain what planning is about, is there'll always be a need to change. You know, places evolve, things change. Yeah. So shops become bigger or they become smaller. Things become redundant. They need to be replaced. You need to think about, population trends will change. And so what you're looking at is how many new houses, what sorts of units do you need? Where's the best place to put them? How do you balance the need for the development against the impact on its environment? So you're usually looking to use space that's already been developed as opposed to green space, which is undeveloped, and make the most of what you've got. And all the time you're just trying to think, how does that work for the community? How does that work for the place you're thinking about? So Ceredigion is quite wide, and I guess it's easier for me to talk about Aberystwyth in terms of it's the place I've sort of always lived and sort of know, but it's always evolved, and I wasn't here when the stretch between effectively the police station and McDonald's was developed, but
I remember
if you what would have happened, over the centuries, the middle bit would have been the castle and inside the walls, and then it would have expanded sort of northwards or eastwards towards the university, Llanbadarn. And so it's all about managing that sort of how much development you need, where do you do it, how does it impact on people, where's the best place for development to go. And then in terms of things in town, I mean, you don't particularly have large development or too much large development, but one of the schemes I would have been involved in or was involved in was the Tesco Marks and Sparks. And so there's probably a debate over whether you have to lose whatever was on the site to in terms of a day centre, but the day centre gets relocated somewhere else.
Yes.
And what you start looking at, what's the best mix? And so what you don't want to lose is the parking, and then it's a question of you going through the procurement sort of exercises in terms of finding a developer. And the discussions that you end up having is the big money is with the food store.
Yes.
So the food store is driving the scheme, and the first scheme that we got in was essentially a solely Tesco scheme. Now, in my mind, that didn't suit the needs of Aber, and the style of the shop was pretty similar to a sort of glass box that you might see in Newtown as a Tesco's, that sort of Tesco. And so you get into discussions about how you can change the two elements, both the mix in terms of what can be the offer, but also what does it look like and how can it sort of fit in with town. And it's not easy with a big building, but you end up talking about what store do you want where. And eventually we got the developer to bring on board the Marks and Sparks. They come to the front. Tesco's is above. You deal with the flooding aspect, so it's on the first floor. And in terms of design, we spent a lot of time just trying to make sure that the thing looked okay given the size of it. Now, some people
it is colossal.
It is. And then, but from a planner perspective, you might think that actually the units next to it are small, and at some stage, it's those units that might get redeveloped if you had to go down that route. So, if you think the other side of the river, where there's some flats behind the initial row of houses, they would have been woodworks, and then they become flats, and some of them are 4-5 stories. So it's not unusual to have that sort of scale, but if you are going to do it, you really have to think, how does it work and what's the right mix?
So it tells a lot. There's a lot of juggling going on there as well.
It sounds terrifying, being in charge of something, or partly in charge of something that impactful and that big.
Because it's just one project as well, though.
That's just one. Yeah. So did that affect you? Like, how do you deal with that? Like, how do you? You're just trained, I guess. Is it?
It's funny. If I could see my notes, I know what I've written up, and I can sort of just bounce them off. But I think the first thing I would say is, I find it fairly simple.
Wow.
It's sort of. I guess as I walk around places, I'm trying to work out how the place works. What's the issues and what needs to change. And then when you look at something like that, you sort of think, well, no, it isn't just a Tesco that you need. It's the other things that you need, and it's got to fit and it's got to look well. And those things sort of just come naturally. Amazing. And so the job itself for me is a relatively easy one. It doesn't particularly stress me out.
Cool.
And then if you approach life with a fairly positive attitude, I think I've had a good life, I've had a decent upbringing, end up in college, get a decent job, things are going well, then the two combined doesn't particularly affect you. And, one of the questions was, do you get stressed or anything?
Yeah.
Not particularly.
Wonderful.
And, it's about, for me, it's, I'm able to look at work in that way, and then other things you put around it. So for me, it's making sure that you little things like booking holidays early, so you've got something to look forward to and not worry about or not get earache about because your partner's saying, when we go on holiday, where we going? That's sort of out early on. And then in terms of the day, it can't be just about home and work. It's got to be something else.
Yeah.
And so you start thinking whether it's a walk in the morning or a walk in the evening, or is it sport, or even if it's going to the pub or the gym or whatever, you've got these different parts of the day. And I'm probably quite fortunate that I don't let them sort of interfere with each
Too
other.
much, yeah.
Yeah, you have to balance it. But
Yeah.
but I think, you know, if I was talking to people, it would always be making sure that you find time to do the things you want to do.
Very important.
That's really good.
Really good code to live by.
That was one of my main questions, like, you know, do you suffer with stress? But you've answered that really well there, and it's I'm going to take a lot from that, because you've got to separate the two, haven't you?
Yeah, well, in fact, it's probably more complicated than that, isn't it? It's more than just work and
free time.
home or free time. There's lots of things going on, and it's being able to recognise what's going on and put in what effort you need in the right way and wherever, but also giving your own time, your own bit of time somewhere, and whether that's own time with someone else or own time on your own.
Yeah.
You know, it's all very important to sort of have a day or a regime, and I know we'll get onto a question about kids' sport, but for me that's something, you know, it's about putting something back. I've been fairly fortunate, put something back, but I often hear in that sort of arena that people haven't got time. You're looking for volunteers, and people say, I haven't got time to do this, and it troubles me a little bit, because I don't believe people haven't got time to do something else. They choose not to do something else. And if they haven't got time, then there's something wrong with the way they approach their life. And they probably need to have a think about how they can create time. It may not be easy, particularly if you were like a single parent, but I think even then there will be ways where people can juggle it so that you get your bit of time, and, you know, each thing's got its own little place in life.
Yeah, we've discussed this briefly on other podcasts before, like talking about how important it is to have some small piece of your own time to enjoy something, whether it's a hobby or even a simple walk or something. And me and Dave were talking about it as well, because we've got 2 young children each. And then sometimes you do your best to find that time, but sometimes it can be difficult with like full-time work, say both kids aren't in school yet or something like that. But it is important. I'm definitely agreeing with you in terms of it being important for yourself, but I can understand how people find it difficult sometimes to grab that time to go and do something that you want, you know, but it is important. Definitely.
Yeah, and I think if you couldn't do it even at the time that you wanted to do it, it's sort of buying it back somewhere else.
Yeah.
So let's say you weren't planning to do anything on a Saturday, you do something on the Saturday to sort of make up for it. It's that sort of thing, and maybe you can't do lots of it at one stage of your life, but trying to make sure that you do things. And I think, you know, I said about planning in holidays. For me, it takes the stress out of worrying about having to set up a holiday, but it's always there. You've committed. You've got that commitment.
Something to look forward to.
Definitely.
And it's the same for other things. So I organise kids football, and I know I got to commit between September and March. You know, I've got to commit. I can find someone to cover, but it's not easy. So I know what I'm getting into, and I got to feel that I can do justice.
That time period, is that the usual sort of youth football season?
Yeah, generally.
And it ends in March, is it?
Yeah, the part of, I mean, obviously there's a setting up period. So between about mid-July and the end of August, you've got to sort of get ready for the season.
So you're right in the thick of it now then?
Yeah, so I organise, and for me, again, it's quite a simple thing, because you've got 8 or 10 clubs in the area. They will between them put together 60, 70 teams. There's about 750 kids involved.
Wow.
It's a lot, isn't it?
And they will do a lot of the paperwork, but you've sort of just got to plan it out that you've got the right things in at the right time. and give you enough time to do the fixtures and fit them to the pitches. So what I'll be doing at the moment is we've already said what we need back in by what time, when do they need to register the players, how much is it going to cost for the season, all that sort of stuff. And then I will be in touch with the 3 or 4 pitch providers to say, look, these are the types we're likely to play. We don't quite know what age groups we're going to play where because we don't know how many teams will be in an age group.
Yeah, you've got to finalise that first.
So that will happen pretty soon. And then hopefully around about the 16th of September, everyone turns up, plays their football, goes home and doesn't think, just thinks it all happens like magic.
That's the key, isn't it? As a planner, you want it to...
And
you always want to be invisible.
Yeah, and in a way, it does work a little bit like that. And possibly, I've been doing it 23 years. I've been chairman for like 16. And so I know a lot of people, and I know roughly the routine.
Yeah.
And I've worked out where there would be issues because things haven't been planned the right way, or you're going to give yourself a headache because you've got to chase stuff. But generally, it works quite well.
I did a quick Google on this. Didn't you get fined or banned or something along those lines?
There was a little bit of a dispute, shall we say? and I think it's like with anything in life, you end up with rules, and sometimes rules seem a bit petty and they seem a little bit wrong. And we had an age group. We moved from a set of age groups at the older age anyway, from 12s, 14s, 16s. To 13s, 15s, 17s, and the idea with the 17s was they're not quite ready for adult football. Gives them another year, and so we had an issue around that because the FAW was saying, and the rules were in this instance were right. Under 17 is adult, under 16 is child. Can't mix the two. And we're saying, well, that's pretty daft because in schools, obviously, they play up until they're 18, and they're school kids. But rules are rules. And then we so we had a little bit of a battle over that, and so that probably set the scene. And then we got into another one where clubs were holding what a festival or tournaments, and we've always had cups in the junior league, but there's a little rule in the FAW rule book which says that leagues can't run cups. It can run competitive cups at a certain age group anyway.
Right.
And we'd always done it. And it came along and you just think, well, what's this about? And so we had another argument and then they say, we require you to come to a hearing in such and such. And I was thinking, I'm not having this hearing lark. No. I put in enough hours to try and put on football for kids, for the community, and I don't need to be required at hearing.
That's the bigger picture, isn't it?
It is.
That it's for them.
Yeah.
It's so important. I think it's one of the really important things of a young person's life. I think is to be around teams, friends, other people
as well, though, isn't it? To be active as well.
Yeah, it's changed a little bit since because what's happened is I think the messaging around it has changed. So. I guess, let's say up to 2010 or 2012, it was always about competition. It was all about play. What it doesn't matter what age the kids were. Yeah. There was a lot of that. Okay, you want them to play, to develop and enjoy, but it still was all about leagues. And now it's completely changed. So it's all up until 11. It's non-competitive football. Cool. There's no keeping of scores. There's no league tables. And they play little mini festivals each weekend. So instead of playing against team A against team B, they play 3 or 4 sides, short games. And in a way, it's just about them getting plenty of touches, not worrying about the score, enjoy themselves, turning up, going home, having a good day. Yeah.
Amazing.
Not putting too much pressure on them, I suppose. Too early.
Absolutely, and I think if there's anyone putting the pressure on them, it's probably the parents.
I agree. You get the pushy parents.
There's always one on each touchline.
I remember a few years ago now, I went to watch, so I'm a Swansea City fan, I went to watch the Swans on a Saturday and went out afterwards, woke up and went to watch kids football, really hungover with my mate, and oh my God, I've never seen so many fights that were just parents slagging each other off.
Yeah, I can imagine
they really get stuck into that. I just didn't know anything like it.
It doesn't happen here, fortunately, and it might have been just where you went. but I was involved with the academy for 4 years. I sort of directed the academy, Aberystwyth Town Academy, and actually it's a little bit of an eye opener because you're going from a local, very community based setup with these 700 kids. And the difference between Aber and let's say South Ceredigion or other areas in Aber, all the games are at central venues, so they're either in Pimwedig, Blaint Darley Football Club, or up on the uni, and there's no home and away in the sense of going to, let's say, in Penryn going to Bow Street going to Penryn, or those sort of little mini rivalries. That's taken out of it. But when you're doing the academy, you did get into that, and then you get into what a sort of everyone here is in terms of sport is quite polite, and then you'd be playing teams from, let's say, South Wales. And all of a sudden, you start to see a big difference.
Yeah, big difference.
Oh, yes.
And you can see, I think going back to the FAW, you can understand why they've got rules, because they've got to set boundaries and they have to deal with lots of different problems in different areas. Sure. And unfortunately, everyone gets caught by that.
Yeah.
And one size doesn't fit all, but I could see why they were doing it. And, we're fortunately going back to under 13s, 15s, 17s. So we got back. We've gone round the circle on that one. We still don't have the competitions for the younger kids, which actually is pretty good.
Nice.
I remember talking about junior football, under 12s. I think we were in the Ian Rush tournament back in the day. We played Tranmere Rovers, and we lost 29-1.
Yeah,
they were like, it was just a completely different level. It was crazy. 29-1. I remember us cheering when we scored. It was like 17-1.
Yeah, and it's ridiculous that sort of thing should be allowed to happen in a way, because I mean we've got our rules. But I mean for the under 11 age groups, they'll play the mini game, so there's not enough time to do that for a start. But even at the older age groups, we've got rules that once it gets beyond, say, 8 goals, then they're meant to stop, mix the players up.
Sure.
It doesn't really happen, but there is this sort of encouragement to stop and think about what's going on here.
Yeah, it's good.
Because
it's a mismatch.
And because you don't want. I mean, okay, if it's Ian Rush, it might have been seen to be a little bit representative and all this sort of stuff. But it's not good for anyone to see teams or kids being, kicked off, goal,
absolutely
take
smashed.
the ball back.
I didn't want to play football again after that, I'll be honest.
No,
and
it's
competitive,
wrong.
don't you?
And you want to encourage all sorts of people to play. It isn't just about the lads that are good in the playground. It's about everyone.
Yeah,
it's about
of course
skills. It's about, you want people to play for health and fitness reasons. Just get out there and enjoy it. And most are able to do that. Particularly if you sort of condition it so that you can't have these sort of ridiculous things going on.
I'm going to change the subject a little bit now, Russell. I understand you've done a lot of fundraising, raising awareness for prostate cancer. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah,
and how that came about.
Yeah, if I might as well start with the prostate cancer first, and then go on to the fundraiser. Because
yes,
I think most people talk about things like prostate cancer as being a sort of old blokes type sort of condition.
Yeah,
and I think people sort of mix it up between the cancer and the sort of enlarged prostate, which means that the prostate's next to the bladder, and so as it enlarges when you get older, it tends to press on the bladder, which means you go to the toilet more often, and people think they've got prostate cancer or problems, but that is just something that happens as you get a little bit older, it enlarges. But it's also an organ that gets gets cancerous, and so my father had prostate cancer. He had it when he was about 73 when he was diagnosed. And I can't say I thought a lot of it, to be quite honest. It was one of these sorts of things you knew was there. You'd have his radiotherapy, he'd have his treatment, and he seemed fine. And he lasted at least another 10 years with prostate cancer. It was outside the prostate when his was found. But
Okay.
I think I didn't pick it up probably early enough in the sense that if there's a family history, the chances of getting prostate cancer change. So If you haven't got a family history, it's about 1 in 8 men will get
Right.
prostate cancer, which isn't particularly good odds to start
It's
with.
not, is it?
So let's say 15% or so, but 1 in 8. And then in terms of people with a family history, it becomes 1 in 3. Now that's not good. It's
very different.
Pretty dodgy chances. So what you should be doing fairly early on, if there's a family history, and I got 2 boys, so they already have had this rammed into them a little bit, and they're more aware than I was, so probably they suggest testing from about 50, but I think if someone had a severe sort of family history, probably from 40s, mid-40s onwards, start to get testing. Now, it's not that easy to go to a doctor, or the doctor seems to put people off having a PSA, and I think part of the thinking is that if you get tested and you get shown to things, people start to worry about it. My take on that is actually you're better knowing about something. Testing and find out there's nothing, or testing and finding something that there is something, so you can do about it. So it just happened to be in the summer, and working with the council, there doesn't tend to be council meetings as in the ones with the members. So your working month changes to the rest of the year. So you've got this. So it sort of frees up a bit of time. And I thought, I was 48, and I thought, I'll see if I could get a health check, it's like MOT from the doctor. So I phoned up, and they booked me in, and I got there, and I said, he said, what do you want? And I said a health check. He didn't really know what I was talking about, but I said, I want a few blood tests, just check, cholesterol, all this sort of stuff. And I talked about a PSA, and he said, you're a bit young, but in the end, he did it, and about 10 days later, it comes back, and it showed a little bit high. So he said, I'm going to refer you to a consultant. That took about 10 weeks. I know it was on a 7-day referral, but it took 10 weeks because there wasn't a consultant in Bronglais, and something happened so it didn't happen quickly. When I got there, they said, you need to do it. Have you had a second PSA? Because certain things can, affect the reading. So no, but they said, okay, you best have a second thing, but we'll book you in for MRI scans and the biopsies anyway. But the next PSA test comes back, it's higher again, and so you're in this sort of conveyor belt of sort of the process of going from one thing to another. And after the biopsy, August was the test. December, I went back to Bronglais with the biopsies, and they say, I said, just your tests have come back, and 15 of the 16 biopsies are showing up cancer. And in visual terms, if you can think of a Cadbury's cream egg, that's the sort of shape a prostate's in, and the biopsies will do 15 jabs around the egg.
Wow. And
15 of those 16 jabs will show in prostate cancer. Now, to me, that's probably telling me that it's riddled with cancer, but it's getting to the stage where it might turn from being contained within the prostate to being outside the prostate. Yeah. Once it's out, you can't cure it really. You can manage it, but it's out, and it potentially gets into other things like lymph nodes and whatever. So at that stage, you think, actually, this is getting a bit more serious than it was the process before, because you've got it, and then it's a question of how do you deal with it. And I talk to the nurses and the consultants. They say treatment's equally as effective whether you have radiotherapy or surgery or whatever. And I was thinking, well, it seems a bit odd, and the different implications of whichever route you went down. So I said, I think I'll go down the radiotherapy because there's probably less side effects. But I'll speak to the consultant surgeon first. Sure. And that was set up for mid-Jan. And I saw him, and he said, Russell, too young to not have it out. He said, you've got family history, it's obviously quite aggressive. And he said, you'll need it out, because if you don't take it out first time and you have radiotherapy, it sort of fuses with other things. You can't do the surgery. So it got, and so he said, so he said, you need surgery, and I booked you in for 2 weeks' time in Cardiff. So
Straight in.
So he
No messing
said,
around.
no, and he'd already done it.
Yeah.
He knew what needed to happen.
I like that.
And
Yeah, I
I
like
think
that. I really
it made
respect that. It's
it
like,
made it
yeah.
really easy because you didn't have this sort of tools where you wanted someone to give you some honest advice. It wasn't that equally as effective. I think they can be equally as effective if you were 75, because you're into a sort of time zone where other things might come into play, and therefore other things happen. So you just manage it, and something else happens. But so 2 weeks later, I'm in Cardiff, and it's done robotically. So there was one robot in Wales, and it's in Cardiff. There's about 40 in England, but one in Cardiff, and the consultant is from Bridgend, and he basically has his day in hospital. And you go in the morning, have the operation. My operation was in the afternoon, and I was on the way home the next day.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah. So if you'd had a normal surgery, you'd probably been in hospital for a week, and other things like catheters. Because the robot is able to do the surgery much more precisely, they're not opening you up for a start. They got little holes that they go in, and because they're less likely to cut things can come out quicker. So if you've got a catheter, it's like 10 days as opposed to a month, which then reduces the risk of infections.
Yeah.
And because the operations aren't particularly short, so I think mine was about 5 hours, you always got the risk of the surgeon being a bit tired by the end of the day.
I'm sure. That's it, isn't it?
It is so simple things like that. So
human, what's the word?
Error, all sorts of stuff.
Just getting tired.
And so what happened? So I came back, and so I was probably up and walking back into town. So I live by the leisure centre, so I could walk up and down the avenue and then pretty much onto the prom, 10, 15 minutes as a sort of rule. I was probably back walking at least that sort of mile-ish from where I live onto the prom and back. Probably been about 3 or 4 days, which is pretty good.
It's really impressive.
And then you just build it up from that. And because it was probably done robotic, I didn't have any side effects. I didn't have any complications.
Brilliant.
A lot of people have bladder problems because they get cut, or it doesn't because the catheter's in so long, bladder loses control. None of that. So
amazing.
But I know, I end up speaking to lots of people who've got issues from that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But it's better to have it treated than not treated.
Yeah, of course.
So you always got to come back to the basics. So coming back to the question, that was a long start to the answer, wasn't it?
I've got another one just before I get into there. But can I just go back to like the diagnosis when you actually got told?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry to tell you, you've got cancer. Like, to me, that's one of the worst things that anyone can say to anybody. It's frightening, isn't it? So how did you react to that?
Probably not the way most people react. It was just one of those sorts of things that it is what it is, and so you've got to then think, I've got to go on to the next step. And sort of fairly pragmatic, sort of black and white about things in that sense. It's like I can't do anything about it. I think if I sort of said as I walked in, I had a detached retina in April. Now that was a little bit scarier because I could immediately tell what the implications of that were. The other, I sort of had to go through a process of, let's go and let's see if there's any issue.
Yeah.
Then I've got to go from one test to another test. Then I've got to work out what treatment I'm going to have if I've got something, and then I have the treatment, and then I've got to see how it works afterwards. This was a case of sitting in a meeting on a screen and thinking there's something wrong with my eye, and it's almost like a little curve sort of appears at the bottom of the eye. I didn't think too much of it. I just thought it might be like a little tear or something, or just something. And a few hours later, I sort of walked into town, so still no real problem. But I started watching the telly evening, and I kept doing this sort of thing, trying to work out which eye. It was something not quite right with the eye. And by the following morning, I was sort of humming on, should I go to casualty or should I not? And but I went in the morning, and by which time it was much clearer to me that this was the disc was getting slightly bigger, and there was a problem, and it's like it becomes grey. It's like a grey wall that starts to appear. And what's actually happened is your retina is falling off, and the bottom is the top of the retina peeling away.
Oh my goodness me!
How did that happen then?
It just happens.
No way.
So it's one of those things again that can happen with age mostly. But if you've had a little tear, and it can come from knocks, so it can come from sport. Boxers have a lot of detached retinas. Not that I've done any boxing, but it's often to do with sport, knocks, whatever. So in that circumstance, I'm sort of thinking, oh Jesus, and the other problem with your eye is you've got two of them, but you start reading up about detached retinas and the chance of the second eye going. And the odds for that aren't brilliant. And it was probably the worst thing I could have done was to Google.
Sometimes it is, isn't it?
Yeah, so you want to find out, but somehow you have to put it out of your mind again.
Yeah,
because it's not good. God. And so that was another one where you've got to go. I mean, fortunately, I went. There wasn't anyone to see here, so I had to go Carmarthen, and I saw a doctor on the same day that I'd been in A&E here, and I had surgery on the Thursday, and it was put back, and because they sort of describe it a bit like the bladder inside the football. It sits on the inside of a circle, and then they go on to explain it a bit like if wallpaper came off your wall and you had to put it back on, it's okay if it's flat.
Yeah, of course.
If it's curved, it's trickier, and what happens is you're likely to get ripples in your wallpaper. Well, you get ripples in your retina, and what that does is it means it's slightly distorted, so things are wavy. So I'm in a situation at the moment where one eye is fine, and it hasn't gone, so that's pretty good. And then the other one is the vision's come back quite well, but it's wavy, and it may settle. It may take about 12 months to settle. So that's probably, of all the things that have ever happened, have been a little bit sort of scary, and
you're losing your sight to be scary.
You know, it's a different thing.
I'm terrified of losing. We used to talk about this in school. Like, what would you rather? We'd always say, what would you rather? Would you rather lose your hearing, or would you rather lose your sight? And we're just like, whoa. The more you think about it, neither.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Absolutely. And I probably did think about that sort of thing at the time. I mean, you know, but I was having no choice over it in the sense that one was going.
Yeah. But the scariest aspect of that story is that nothing caused it. No impact, no
neither
trauma. That's scary.
Nothing that you remember anyway. Maybe you did take a knock.
Certainly, yeah, and it could have happened. I don't know, half a year to a year, that may have slightly torn it. And then what happens is if it's torn, the jelly inside the eye that keeps it round starts to seep behind. Bit like water getting behind paper.
Sure.
Whereas the prostate cancer side of things, no signs at all. There aren't any. And I was in a sort of council workshop one lunchtime, a little session on prostate cancer, and the person giving the presentation mentioned that a lot of people, the first time they know about it is when they've sort of got back pain. And they go to the doctor, and actually one of the things it can be is the cancers in the bones.
Right.
Oh, really?
At that stage, it's out and quite aggressive and quite a problem. And whereas early doors, you just don't know. So it's one of these things where the checks are really important.
Sure.
So to go and get tested, and if it says nothing, that's great. If it says something, you've got a chance to do something about it, and you can either monitor it, see if it changes, have radiotherapy. There's loads of other different things. I guess at some stage the surgery will probably be phased out because there'll be something that can deal with it. But at the time, that was the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. It was you prompting that, wasn't it? It was you prompting them to say, "Oh, would you mind just giving us a quick check?"
Absolutely, yeah. It was just, there's a bit of, I would say, luck involved in that when you do it, and where it is in terms of the development of the cancer.
Yeah.
But I guess it's also, you've got to take responsibility for yourself. So, it is a bit of luck, but at the same time, you ought to try and look after yourself and get checked. But to do that, it comes back to the question, which was about raising money or being involved, is people have got to be aware of things to be able to do something. So from the diagnosis, and by sort of usual things sort of kicks in, you think, I'll have to do something, because you can recognise these things that weren't quite right. I did get in touch with Prostate Cymru, so they like Prostate Cancer UK. They've got different badges, but they do the same thing, but they only work in Wales. Right. And they basically paid for they paid for the training for the robot. So that there was a robot bought for Wales, but they didn't
know what to do.
They didn't have the surgeons trained to do it. So that's one of the things they do, and they've got sort of like specialist phone advice that you can phone up people in the evening. If you're worried, you can phone. So I thought, well, okay, let's raise a bit of cash. And I happened to be getting married the same year that I had the operation. Got married on the pier in Aberystwyth. First and last wedding on the pier itself.
No way.
So the wedding itself was actually in a brasserie. So we decorated that all out. Yep. And effectively we took over that part, but a lot of the do was on the beer garden.
Yeah.
So,
out the back.
Out the back. So we had a little bunting, and the photos are of there's about 180 people at this wedding on the back, and so we had it there. And basically, instead of presents, we said we want donations to Prostate Cancer. So that was the first bit.
Lovely.
Nice. And then we carried on later in the year, because that was the same year my father then died, and he did die because of prostate cancer. So it had already been advanced, but it basically got more and more aggressive. He did a sort of couple of rounds of chemo, and I think he just found it was just too much and decided enough's enough. I'm out of here in a way. And so again, you just use that to raise funds, and so from there, I've done, that was the first batch, and then I set up with a couple of other people, a Ceredigion Friends of Prostate Cancer, so sort of small support group. Started off holding sort of evening sort of meets for anyone who wants to know a little bit more about prostate cancer, or meet people who can talk to them about whatever. And we were quite fortunate that we'd had a retired urologist, sort of specialist nurse and consultant who lived in the area. They would help with the talks, and then myself and a chap called Glenn would do the fundraising side. And so it was all working well, and then COVID came along, and so the support bit stopped. But we've still been doing the walks, big walks. We sort of throughout July, we just finished one and raised, I don't know, 1,200 quid.
Oh, that's really good.
Just helps.
Definitely.
And it's just, it's just about, getting people aware, and just making sure that people know that if they want to speak to someone, they got someone to speak to.
Yeah.
And knowing, I try and get across that I don't have any medical experience, but I've been there.
Yeah,
at least I know something.
Yeah.
And you can feed that back into it. So.
Yeah. Sometimes I think men are like similar, just opening up and talking. Sometimes they're not as good, and I think sometimes men are quite scared to go and get checked up in MOT, or maybe they don't want to burden people's time. They're thinking like, oh well, I'm probably just worrying about nothing, but they could be something really serious. And I think that's something else that men maybe need to get a little bit better at. Number one is discussing their issues and talking to people, and then maybe actually going into the hospital to go and get themselves checked out.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's one thing, as someone said, it's one thing knowing you ought to do it, it's another thing doing it.
Yeah, I'm terrible for that.
Yeah.
Because I live day by day, and I think I'll go to a doctor's or a hospital if I think something's wrong. That's literally how my brain is.
Yeah.
Just it.
But then with like Russell's saying, there's no symptoms to this thing.
No, and I didn't know that.
Thing, isn't it? I didn't know that.
No, I didn't know
that.
I
presumed it was like, I'll be getting up in the night loads to go to the toilet. That's what.
Or a pain, or
that might be further along the line.
Yeah,
it's almost too late. I guess, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. What I find myself doing now, I'll come across people in work. So there was a person in that workshop in work who did actually say, that's exactly what happened to me. I had back pain, gone to someone.
Right.
I immediately sent a message afterwards, said, look, if you want to have a chat, have a chat.
Yeah.
I said,
That's really nice.
you know, because I as soon as he said it, I just knew what that meant. You know, he's getting treatment, and we'll see how it goes. But I often find myself so in the work environment, but also just out and about, and you sort of know a lot of people, sort of. So it's as if I was in the pub, often talking about it. Funny enough, with men. And then one of the things we try and get across in sort of some of the Prostate Cymru group stuff is to encourage, you know, encourage the women to be part of the groups, because they're the ones who tend to encourage their partners to go and get checked.
Exactly that. Go and please go to the GP. You're not wasting anyone's time, or just go and do it.
And ultimately, you know, it's not just the bloke who's going to be affected, is it? It's going to be the family around them.
Yeah, of course it is. It
So
affects everybody.
what's involved in the test?
Just a simple blood test. It takes
so
about,
it's not, you know, because your mind could probably go places with, you know, a prostate test and all that sort of
I
stuff.
mean,
Like test.
I think,
Yeah. There you go.
The blood test is just a little syringe and in a test tube, and off it goes. Now, obviously, if it shows something else, they'll start looking in more detailed scans and whatever. But the first bit is really easy, and it's a bit like any test where they're just seeing if you've got an infection or whatever it is. It's just
There we go.
easy, and there's sometimes a bit of pushback from the doctors, but realistically, you know, if people say I want one because there's a history, or I just you know, I'm interested to find out, I'm better off knowing than not knowing, then they'll do it.
Definitely. I had my blood work looked at a couple of years ago, I think, because I kept on going back about an enlarged lymph node, and I've got like sort of the same as most people, cancer in the family. I lost my dad when he was 57 to cancer, and so I kept on going back like twice or three times, and then they did my blood work, and they obviously screened it, and luckily it was fine, if you know what I mean. But so I've had that process just to make sure everything's okay, and if anybody thinks that anything's out of the norm, definitely go, isn't it, and try and get yourself checked out.
Yeah.
You know,
I had my blood checked about, when was it, a month, 6 weeks ago, and just a standard sort of blood test. And I said, oh, whilst we're here, can you just check everything, kind of like what you did?
MOT.
Yeah, and it sort of came back the next day. Like my thyroid levels were like super low, and I had to get on medication like that next day. But I didn't know. She said, well, haven't you not been feeling like really tired and lethargic? I said, well, yeah, I'm like 39, I've got 2 young kids, I'm in work, I've got loads of stuff going on after. How would you sort of differentiate that? So just go get your bloods checked. You never know what's going to crop up, do you?
Yeah. I know for myself, I'm not one naturally who goes to the doctor to have things checked out, but actually some things really ought to be checked. And you just, again, it's going back to one of the early points, finding that little bit of time to do it. You know,
I'm going to certainly think seriously about that as well.
You had a good question, you haven't brought it up yet, about Russell's
Well, I got a few questions there, but I don't know, we've just been rolling with it, and it's been really good. But one of the questions was sort of like, have you changed, has your outlook on life changed whatsoever since finding out about the cancer? And I'm assuming now, I don't know whether you call it full remission now because you've had all the cancer sort of removed, I'm assuming, if you know what I mean. But has your outlook on life changed at all or not?
What happens now is I have to have a yearly check. I know I don't talk in terms of remission. I had it. Is how I see it.
Yeah.
But I do have a PSA check every year, and it's come back at 0.1. Now 0.1 is the lowest it can be.
Right.
So we don't start at 0 for whatever reason. It's 0.1. And to me, that's a good sign. But I do it every year just to check it hasn't changed. And I take that as meaning that it didn't sneak out somewhere and is starting to grow again.
Yeah.
You know, so it's so that's quite reassuring. In terms of outlook, I think it's probably just emphasised or sort of just said to me, just make sure you carry on enjoying life. You know, you maintain that positive outlook, because you know, you do realise you're only here once, and something can sort of affect that, whether it's a sort of temporary thing or a sort of life-threatening thing.
Serious,
But I don't think I particularly changed anything. I haven't decided to stop drinking or eating.
Spending more in the pier or anything like
that. Yeah, all those sorts of things carry on, and it's like making sure you have the holidays and all these other bits and pieces, so that you actually you don't sort of just end up just doing one or two things. You've got to make sure you've got the right balance.
I guess one thing that's changed though is you kind of want to help people, I suppose, don't you? Or get the message out there to get people to get checked out.
Yeah, I mean that has changed.
Yeah.
You know, it's just an additional thing to I wouldn't have done. I've always probably been one of those sort of people who will do things for other people, and I think it goes back to the sort of Llandudry days where there's a sense of being, I don't know, a sense of pride, but a sense of being lucky, you know, and of having a little bit of a privileged background in that sense, and feeling that I have the ability, I have the skills to give something back. So, even the little things back to Llandudry was through the old boys cricket going back, and now I still feel invested enough in the school to become a governor. I just happened to see in that particular instance they wanted someone to be involved with estates, and estates fall part of my day-to-day job. So it felt another fairly easy one to get in and help. And then in terms of junior football, that is all about helping in the community and doing something. And so it just felt a natural thing to sort of just get up. And I did have conversations with people to say that there's only so much I can do, and what I don't want to do is sort of get involved in a group where the expectation is you're doing something all the time. So we were doing the support group meetings like 3 or 4 times a year, and we were doing, say, 2 fundraisers, one in November, which is called the Big Breakfast, and that's a sort of Wales-wide thing, initiative, so Big Breakfast, Novembers. And we do one in the rugby club, sort of 80, 90 people, and do a little bit of a raffle, whatever. And then in July is the walk. So it's trying to make sure that you don't stretch yourself. It's another thing that you're committed to, and running out of space to fit all these things in.
Spreading yourself a little bit too thin. I've got to go back to one question as well. Why was it one and done on the weddings on the pier? Why were you the first?
That was the skip through.
I think it may not be the last, but it's been the last since.
Right.
And I think there may be a couple of, I suppose, practical reasons, but I know they wanted to do weddings, and they had a wedding license, but they didn't have anyone to take it up. We sort of knew this, and because I suppose. I would see the inn on the pier as being my local,
right?
So because I know certain people know the management, you end up talking about the pier. It just seems a great place to have a wedding. It's got the space. Yeah. I think we got married on a Friday, and that avoided their sort of peak times in terms of certainly the use of the brassiere at that stage. So this is 2016, sort of where they'd hopefully have really good days on food, and then they'd go into the evening on food, and then they'd switch over to the sort of
the nightlife,
the club bit of it, and so it would have to be done at the right time, and I guess their busy times would also be the summer, and so there's a bit of a tension between when you have a wedding and what days can you have it, and so on. So, and because you only have a wedding license for like 3 years, if you don't
renew
it will last, and it costs, I don't know, it's probably about £1,000 to get a wedding license. So so we did it, and
nice.
It's got the photos. If you ever dig deep enough in Facebook, there's plenty of them.
I did have one question, and originally it was sort of regarding your career, but it can go beyond that a little bit. Have you got any regrets?
Regrets? No.
Yeah.
Goodness.
No, probably not. I mean, I'll try and think of one, but I can't really.
Any projects that maybe you wanted to push, they didn't happen?
No, I've always. I mean, there was a question earlier about what was Llandudry like, and I really enjoyed Llandudry. It was just a great place, and I think you've got to suit that environment. And when I went to when I was in London, I enjoyed working for Hounslow Borough Council. I again work, great set of colleagues, bits and pieces outside of work. On a normal day, did a lot of cricket, and still meet with people from that working environment. Nice. Now every year we meet up in September, so that's coming up. So really enjoyed that, and then here slightly different because you tend to have to drive to work a bit more, and you probably don't have the same sort of bonding. But in terms of projects, works, I'm pretty happy, and I probably feel fairly lucky in terms of being able to have done as much as I've done, and covered as much as there is to cover. And I think if my mother was here talking about me, she'd probably talk about, no, you could still do an MBA, or you could do this or do that. But it's like, no, mother, I've done what I want to do.
Yeah. Were they quite pushy then? Was that what you said with your mum?
I think quite driven. My father was sort of quite happy, quite relaxed about things, and then I think my mother just felt that she wanted me to achieve. I think that's what it was, and if there was opportunities, wanted to take those opportunities. And I think part of the reason I ended up in Llandovery was there's a couple of reasons. One, in Borth, I think because it's only like a two class school, you can end up in the second class, the higher class, young, and be in there for 2 or 3 years, and you can't move up to the secondary school. So that worried my mother, because she probably just think I just sort of sit on my levels and not really advance. So that was one thing that would have been running through her mind. But my brother's Down syndrome, and I guess we probably just had a good laugh when we were young, and it was a case of, we better pack him off to school. And she'd probably give me that reason anyway, that it was about that. It might have been that it just had enough of me, but yeah, that's the background to all that.
So I guess linked to a bit of this is what do you do to wind down? You obviously cricket. We read that you do some diving as well. Is that right? Scuba diving? I
did do diving because I can't dive now. Simply because the eye. But there would be other I have to watch sort of heart blood pressure.
Right.
So I've done diving, and that was probably something which was a little bit out of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
And it was one of these things where I'd go to Egypt fairly frequently. And it was always in places where people would dive, so they'd walk past, and then at some stage you think, am I going to do this or not? And it's like, I'd never jump out of a plane. I know I'd never do that. I'm not particularly good with heights. And I just thought, can I do the diving? Can I do that? And it's a mind thing, it is.
Yeah.
It's great. I find it quite easy once I sort of decide I'm going to do it. You do your lessons and you can dive, and as long as you can control your breathing, you're okay. You still there's still a few things that play on your mind when you're underneath. How quickly will you end up going back up? But certain fish are quite big, and you don't know how friendly they are. And the other thing is, if you're in Egypt diving, there's always boats going across the top of you. And so if you lose control, you'll just back. And so that was always a little bit of a worry, but so I think it's just finding something to do, and COVID would have meant maybe you couldn't have gone out to do restaurants or go to the pub, so you end up doing a lot more walking, and so you get into a different routine. Habit, and I think, funny enough, we met on the stairs in Canolfan Rydal a couple of days ago, and just very briefly, it's like you could easily get out of a habit of doing things, and then you're back into this homework. You've got to just find things to do, and so plenty of going on, and
good.
Christmas party happening this year in the Piering?
Absolutely. There's a little bit of a story there. In that we call one part of the inn the office, which is the bar bit up nearest to the windows.
Right.
And there's a friend of mine called Di and myself who've always sat there, and we're sort of seen as like the directors of the office. And you sort of play on this nonsense. And we decided one year we'd best have an office party. And it was just like, we'll have an office party and we bring in, say, a bottle of port and let's have some cheese. And there was probably only about 4 or 5 of us there the first year. And as it over the years, it sort of progressed. And so what we, more food, more drink, and bring in lots of port. But we give everyone a glass of port who's in there. So it's just... it's just one of those sorts of things where you think, let's have a Christmas party.
Let's do it properly.
Have an office party and look after whoever's there. Make sure everyone enjoys themselves.
Nice.
So. What date is that? Just so
Yeah,
I can jot it down maybe in my calendar.
It's a bit late last year because the cheese was a bit sweaty and the port was a bit warm, so I was just like,
it's probably going to be the Wednesday before Christmas, I reckon.
Right.
It's probably where we pitch it. And yeah, actually, we used to use a little bit of the more the merrier. But it is one of those sorts of things. It's only there until it lasts in terms of the port, but it's a bit of fun.
Nice.
And,
Sounds lovely.
Best double up on the port.
Any more? I got a few quick fire questions for Russell. But I mean, is there anything you wanted to talk about whilst you're on here, or?
No, I think I'm just trying to think what's on my little note. But I think
Feel free to grab them.
I think I've pretty much covered what I thought we were going to come and talk about.
I had a fun one. I hope it's fun anyway. What would you love to see in Aber? What do you think possibly Aber could benefit from? Or
That's a good question.
Because Nando's, I've always said I would absolutely love a Nando's here. Just saying.
I'd love more stuff for the kids.
Yeah.
It's a really tricky one. It's what you'd want, some decent indoor facility, wouldn't
Yes.
you? I think that's
the weather's terrible, so indoors is a good idea.
Yeah, I think the problem is that when people raise it, and I often see things, let's have an ice rink or let's have this, and the money's not in it. So somehow you've got to find the money. And something like that, or possibly more realistically, is a more thriving new part of town. And what's going through my mind there is you've got a harbour that's a bit sort of, down. It's had its.
I know exactly what you mean.
It's a nice area in one sense, but it needs more happening to it. And I think if you go there now and you see Medina's Porto,
that's great.
And before that, Alana and Piscotti before that, it shows what can happen in a space that's underused and not necessarily particularly pleasant look to it. So I think there's whole areas like that where you could actually uplift the offer.
Definitely.
And create, and it'd be different. It'd be part of the town, but not part of the town. And one of the things we're talking about is trying to create a bridge over to the harbour side. So you go from the dry dock, in effect.
I know what you mean.
Over to the harbour house, and what the original sort of vision was to have restaurants, outdoor seating on that part of it, and then you could sort of create an easier walk around the harbour and back. Wow. And so it'd be great to have better facilities, better indoor stuff, but realistic, it's going to be a tall ask unless you can find a lot of funding.
Sure.
Whereas if I was looking at the current makeup of the town, if you could add in a bustling sort of Hengoleg, in terms of once that work's done, if it can pull it off in terms of internal uses, sort of smartened up prom and linking up to a much better thriving harbour area, then I think you could have a much better town.
Nice.
That people. I think the conditions have changed. So I think when I was in London, you start to see this sort of cafe culture, the outdoors sort of seating happening in the borough I was in, sort of stretched from Heathrow to Chiswick. Chiswick was the sort of place where there was lots of cafes and shops with already the seating outside. People here were the view it would never happen because it's too cold and too wet. And actually you start to see that culture coming in. It's, if you go to places like Aberystwyth, it works really well because it's quite a square. It's got the quay, and the paving, the wider pavements work pretty well. So and once they're replaced with more permanent stones, then they'll look better as well. So you've got the space. And it partly happened in Arbor, but it's not quite there. But you can see the signs of it happening. Yeah. You chuck that in along with, with the harbour, and you start to see it's, the town changing. Yeah. But changing, it's no longer just the shops, it's about everything else you do.
You saw a bit of it in COVID.
Lovely.
Because you remember in COVID, obviously everyone, because of the 2 metre rule, a lot of people started to sort of dine outside a little bit. I know Medina's did it, and a few other restaurants and stuff. I thought that was quite nice when the weather was nice in COVID. Yeah. We had lots of seating outside, and then they did that new system on the roads, didn't they, which also allowed the outside seating. Yeah, I love that. So you saw a bit of it then.
That was one of my jobs. It was. We had. I don't really want to say Gold Command and Silver Command and things, that sort of stuff. But these emergencies sort of terms they give to groups. But one of the things we were looking at is how do we deal with the economy side? How do you deal with that impact? And so I chaired that group, and that was the push. It's like, let's see how this goes, and lots of people like it. You get a lot of feedback, kickback.
Of course you do.
Particularly people who want to park closer to town or need to park closer to town. But on the whole, you could start to see things can work in terms of outdoor eating, and it's the it's the look as well that changes. It looks for the better, and you start to see more things on the prom. The economy itself hasn't helped in terms of people not having the money to be able to do certain things. But so you haven't got as many outlets as you want. But you've got to be optimistic, haven't you?
Of course. You do.
Cool.
Quick fires.
Couple of quick fire questions for you, Russell.
Here we go.
Favorite film?
Any Bond film for me.
Oh.
Favourite Bond film, though.
It's got to be.
The favourite Bond. Well, funny enough, I watched one last night, and Casino Royale was the one.
That's
I watched.
A good one.
That's my favourite Daniel Craig one.
Yeah,
without a doubt.
Yeah. So
who's your favourite Bond?
Favourite Bond, probably. Because of my age, probably Roger Moore, just because of that sort of age group. I mean, other people take, and I quite like Daniel Craig as well. It's one of those sorts of, it changes over time. But any sort of Bond film, I quite like watching films. But I sort of watch them and probably end up having to watch them again because I haven't probably watched them.
I understand. That does something. Favorite band or music?
You've got to go back to the 80s, and it's all any of the sort of Tears for Fears, Pet Shop Boys, Duran Duran,
Tears for Fears.
all those sorts of things. There was a lad in London whose his brother was in Tears for Fears.
No way.
So so
really?
So that's sort of 82, 83, 84 type. So that sort of thing. And in terms of concerts, I've never really been to many concerts, but one concert I did go to is Madonna in Wisconsin, and there was about 2,000 people, and it was it's like a park.
Whoa. Oh my gosh!
And the backing group were not the backing group, but the was level 42. Yeah,
I don't know them.
They're from that sort of era.
I've definitely heard them. Yeah, I love listening to the Smiths and the Cure from the 80s, and I still do. I love
all those sorts
bands.
of things. Loads of, and I guess when I was brought up, you start thinking, listening to things from the 60s because that's what your parents were playing, isn't it? And then our kids will, you start going back to the 80s. It's just 20-year bands.
Yeah. They might listen to Crazy Frog or something. I'm joking.
Oh, God, no. Yeah. Favourite destination?
The place I've been to most is Egypt. And always for sun and lying and just enjoying myself, and obviously doing a little bit of swimming, scuba diving or snorkeling. But probably the best place, the place I liked most was Cuba.
Ooh.
Went to Havana for 4 nights, and then went to Varadero afterwards for about 2 weeks.
Cigars?
And that was really nice. Yeah, the cigar is not the most pleasant experience, but sort of thing you're doing on the off party night, isn't it? When you had a few beers, you'd have a big cigar if you could. So yeah, Cuba's really good. And then talking about planning holidays, going on holiday in January to 3 nights to Singapore, then a 12-night cruise up to Hong Kong, and then doing 3 nights in Hong Kong. And I've never really done the Far East, but I could see that that'll be a good trip.
Definitely.
And food-wise,
hello.
if you were to ask me about food, then it would be that sort of Thai, Chinese.
Yeah,
sort of-
definitely. It's unbelievable.
Incredible.
So it'd be that's where I pitch it. So that's not a bad start to 2024.
That's good.
No. Similarly,
lovely.
Something to look forward to.
I think I'm going to Bangkok in February, early Feb.
Are you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
so.
we got a
Nice.
little stint in Bangkok.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's cheap.
Bangkok. Yeah,
Good.
Super cheap, really good food. Street food's amazing.
Nice.
yeah. So
Oh, I can't wait.
Good. I'm pretty happy actually. Any you boys want to anything else?
Podcast, yeah.
No, I'm good.
Yeah?
Brilliant. I'm good. As long as you're happy, Russell.
I'm very happy.
Good.
I'm now going from one. Oh, that's that job.
Yeah.
Now it's like I'm going to walk down to the pier, and there is one thing I've got to do, and it's like, and I pitched it up. There's one bloke who was always in the pier, 75, 76. Does a bit for British Legion. He had a stroke about 3 months ago. Took him about a month to come out, or more, maybe 6 weeks. And he lives on his own in town. And funny enough, one of the people we were with is his landlord. And we were thinking, well, hold on, have you not got him any, because he was a drinker. Yeah. So I'm going to go in and say, right, we're going to have a whip round for Mike, and I'll get him some wine from the whip round. So I keep in touch with him on Facebook, and
There we go. Nice.
so that's my little job for when I get there to get a bit of money off people and
Lovely.
make sure we get him some wine.
Nice.
Look, thanks very much for coming on, and thanks very much for being so open and honest, because hopefully, you never know, it might help someone who's listening to this.
Yeah, no, that's
It's helped me. I'm definitely.
Yeah.
My mind up to definitely just getting checked out.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Especially, it's a little blood
We're at that
test.
sort of age group now, aren't we?
Yeah.
So yeah, Russell, thanks a lot.
Yeah,
Thank you.
no problem.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Cheers.
Thank you.